listeners, I'm Sam with Below the Radar, a knowledge democracy podcast. Below the Radar is recorded on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. On this episode of the Below the Radar B-Sides, our host Am Hall is joined by Andrew Witt, an art historian and critic who writes on contemporary art. Am and Andrew discuss Andrew's new work, Lost Days, Endless Nights, a critical study and artist's book on the history of photography and film from Los Angeles. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, welcome to Below the Radar. Delighted that you could join us again this week as part of our B-side series with the podcast. We have our special guest, Andrew Witt, with us today. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, Em. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Andrew, maybe we can start with you introducing yourself a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm an art historian, cultural critic. I write about photography, the history of photography, as well as I write about aesthetic theory and contemporary art in Vancouver, but also internationally.
Of course, you have other hats that you wear as well. You literally live across the street from me.
We are neighbors.
Your occasional bartender at Pale Fire.
Yes.
A lot of cameos in this small city of ours. Wonderful to have you with us today. I have with me a kind of a doorstopper of a book here, a hardcover, Lost Days, Endless Nights, Photography and Film from Los Angeles. It's quite a massive undertaking, this project.
It's a big book. It's around 300 pages or so. Yeah. Took 10 years to write. You could even trace it back even further to 2008 when I was in Bill Wood's modernism and postmodernism class at UBC, when I saw in the last class this work by Alan Sekula from the photo series Fish Story. And it's a book about LA photographic culture from the 1970s to the present, tracing the history of some of its key photographers, filmmaker, artists, and the networks of support and collaboration and education in LA in the contemporary period.
Yeah, so I first encountered your writing, and I met you during the time period of the Olympics. I suppose you were writing articles with the Mainlander and other places, and it's no small undertaking to try to write any type of book, especially an immense book like this one, and for how long it took the duration of it. Wondering if you can sort of begin with its roots back in 2008, where some of the ideas germinated for some of the writing and where this got started.
Yeah, like I said, it was in this last class in Bill Wood's modernism, postmodernism class. It was the last slide in his lecture, and it was a slide of the work Fish Story. And when I saw this work, it was kind of taken by this kind of beautiful image, or a sequence of images of the port culture in Los Angeles in the early 1990s. And at the time, I didn't know what to do with this work, and we kind of quickly passed it by in the class as well. And from there, I tried to read Fish Story itself is this expansive project about the international division of labor, global shipping, containerization, new forms of shipping, and the development of kind of port culture. And Sekula, it was an extended project of his, documenting and photographing the port in Los Angeles, but traveling to Poland, Rotterdam. And it's the project itself, his photo book, Fish Story, is this kind of a very expansive work. It's 2 essays. There's these extended captions, almost aphoristic descriptions of port culture. And then there's all of these images too, right? And it's kind of this unwieldy, it's just hard to grasp, but it's ungraspable. And I wanted to write about this project for the longest time. In the meantime, I made a PhD application to the University College London as a PhD student working on Sekula's book, but I never wrote about it. I never wrote about Fish Story. It was a work that I wanted to write about, but I didn't know how to articulate, the larger project or develop a vocabulary to talk about it. So in the meantime, I started writing about other projects, other works. And from there, I started to trace a larger network of artists who were Sekula students, his colleagues at CalArts, like John Devola. And from there, I started to look at this expansive body of work from different artists, like Catherine Opie, one of Sekula's students, to Martha Rossler, one of Sekula's friends and colleagues at UC San Diego in the early 1970s. And from there, I was like, oh, this work from Southern California is both theoretically, ambitious and formally like experimental as well. And I wanted to think through this moment in time from the 1970s to the present. And the one thing I would say is that this moment of not knowing how to articulate, not knowing how to historicize a project like Fish Story haunted me for almost 10 years. And then finally, I had a chance to revisit the project when I went to the Getty in around, let's say, 2019 to view Sekula's archive, his archival works, because he had passed away in 2013. And he donated his entire notebooks, his slides to the Getty Research Institute. And I had a chance, I was one of the first people to visit his archive. And from there, I was able to think through, I guess, his process of, working, but also writing about images through this kind of intensive archival project, looking at his work. And I think from there, I was able to finally develop a vocabulary and talking through and speaking about his work. But in the meantime, I had written all these other essays about his collaborators and colleagues. And by, I guess, 2020, I had this, finally about a 9-chapter book on photographic culture in Los Angeles. Sorry, that's a very expensive.
Yeah, it's good. I remember when Alan Sekula came to Vancouver for a screening at SFU, School for Contemporary Arts. I think Monica Shishwick had brought him out through, I can't remember, but they were in conversation together. I remember seeing one of the pieces of that project, which was absolutely stunning, and just seeing the pacing of the containers and the ships, and it was a great conversation. The other pieces that other artists that you look at in the book, people like Agnes Varda, Dana Lichtenberg, Catherine Opie, you mentioned, John Devola, Gregory Halpern, Paul Mapagi-Sapua, Guadalupe Rosales. I'm wondering how you went through the process of selecting these artists as part of the people you cover in the book.
A lot of it was by chance, right? So it was based off of encounters I had in exhibitions, for instance, seeing John Devola's photographic series Zuma in an exhibition in Oslo and being blown away by this work. We could maybe put up examples of his photographs on the podcast page, but it's these interiors that are graffitied with these kind of strange marks of black, silver, spray paint, but the interior itself is ruined. It's burnt out. It's been destroyed, and he's illuminated the interior with his high-powered flash. And you can kind of see through this interior and see the kind of the surf of Malibu and these waves kind of crashing onto the shore. These are very strange images. And again, this is a work that was shot around 1978, 79. And again, when I saw the work, I was like, oh, this is a work that's made at the same time as Sekula is developing his trying to rethink the social documentary project. But then you have someone like John Devola making these extraordinary images in Zuma Beach of these kind of destroyed interiors. And at the same time, he's also visiting the MGM backlot in Culver City, California. the MGM backlot, which is being actively demolished by the studio system because it's bankrupt. No, they're no longer, these studio backlots are deemed obsolete by the studio system. And so he's visiting these backlots, but the backlot is a backlot that's constructed to look like New York City in the near future. This is a backlot that is used for all these post-apocalyptic science fiction films shot in the near future. But it's also a ruin. They're actively demolishing it. So, and then these images themselves also have a visual echo to the work of Martha Rosler, her work on the Bowery, that famous work about a critique of documentary representation, a work that's called The Bowery and Two Inadequate Descriptive Systems, right? Photographs of these street fronts, signage or the street fronts of the Bowery Street in New York with descriptions of general common day drunkenness. And both for the photo and the descriptive system, the words are inadequate. That's how, So these are works that like this Devola work, Zuma, I encountered this in this exhibition. And again, I, didn't have the vocabulary to talk about it. And, as the image stayed with me as I read more, then I was like, okay, there's something about this work which is worth talking about and thinking through. But the short answer is like a lot of this work is just encountered by chance, right? Yeah.
And so in the sort of back description of the book, it talks about lives of the forgotten and dispossessed of LA, unemployed, precariously employed, evicted, alienated. In terms of the expansiveness of the artists that you're speaking about, both as either as photographers or filmmakers, what is sort of the through line in terms of the group of people you've brought together to think through? What does it tell us about the material place of Los Angeles? Why this place? And what is the story that you were able to weave together through looking at this work?
I think a lot of the images focus on the lives of ordinary people. So people, dock workers, unemployed, the precariously unemployed. There's a whole chapter on Agnes Varda's work, 2 films in Los Angeles, one is called Murmurs, another one is called Documenter, and they're shot relatively at the same time. And Murmurs is just a chronicle, an account of the murals of Los Angeles. But the murals of Los Angeles are made by residents of East LA trying to articulate a counter history of, say, Latinx culture in Los Angeles that was opposed to the draft in the Vietnam War, the American War in Vietnam, and how community members were being drafted into the war. And so some of the murals kind of document part of that resistance. So Varda's work is attuned to that history. And so I would say that someone like Anthony Hernandez takes these extraordinary photographs, these portraits of the bus riders of Los Angeles. There's that old saying that no one takes the bus in LA. But if you look at Anthony Hernandez's photographs, there's this, you see that the buses are overcrowded. So he's turning his camera to these lives of, say, the forgotten. You also have that with, Gregory Halperin's description of his ambition of his project of trying to, in that photo book, Zizix, where he's attempting to photograph and document an LA that's not depicted in, say, the Hollywood films of the era. So that's, I think that's part of the, it's a history from below, you could say, told through photographs and told through the films of the region.
And then in terms of the containment of time, roughly looking at 1970 to the present, or up to 2020, let's say, what does that passage of time look like through this work? What were some of your reflections on seeing this sweep of time through this particular work with the particular material that they were working through?
So this is, the one way to frame this project is not like a typical survey. So it doesn't start from the 1970s and move to the present. It starts with an account of this Gregory Halpern's photo book, Zizix, and this is a contemporary photo book. So it's a book that's shot between 2008 and 2016. And this book also starts in the Mojave Desert. So it doesn't actually start in LA, it starts in the desert. It starts in this town called Zizix, which no longer exists, a town that was kind of built out of the desert by this almost cult leader, Curtis Taus Springer, who wanted to create this health resort in the middle of the desert in Mojave. And he took a mining claim on the site and built this health resort. Eventually went bankrupt, and the town is no more, right? He built this castle, a library, a cafeteria. Now it's just a ruin. And so now it's a ruin, but it's also it's a research center for the University of California, Riverside. But this is a farcical, this is a fictional town, doesn't exist, but it's a real place. And then so Halpern moves from the desert and slowly kind of takes photographs of this kind of ruined town, this ruined facility. And then he also photographs the pedestrians of downtown LA, some of the landscapes of the city. And there's a sense that his images are almost otherworldly and strange and somewhat mysterious. And it's not a typical documentary project. There's a quality to the images which are like almost, like I said, otherworldly. I think it sets the tone for the project on the whole. It sets the stakes of the project. There's this quote at the beginning, at the very first opening line of the book, which is a quote from Sekula, and he says that modernism is uncomfortable with the intractability of the world. Documentary confronts that intractability head-on as a political and representational aesthetic problem. And so I like this idea of this intractability, this image of the world as it is. The intractability, you think of it as the waywardness of the image, its difficulty, its unwieldy quality. But then there's also in the book, there's all these images of kind of natural disaster. Even the front cover of the book is an image of a fire. The first image is of a flood, right? So he's grappling with kind of the popular representations of Los Angeles as a city and a site for disaster and catastrophe. And that, I think, this is a current that flows through the work, a reflection on kind of the present moment as a moment of disaster. And I think that also reflects back to how some of the more popular writers of Los Angeles, like Nathaniel West, Joan Didion, write about LA as well. It's this notion of a disaster, even fire is a general atmosphere, ambience, theme, allegory that pulses through the work. And you have that, but there's no real account of the visual culture of the city. And some of this, the disasters are of a minor nature. Like in Varda's work, she's dealing with a breakup and a feeling of rootlessness of being this French filmmaker suffering from a breakup, living in Los Angeles. And this is still, for her, a disaster. Anyway, so yeah, that's a...
Yeah. Well, I remember the fire that just happened earlier this year when Lizzie Borden came up. It is just a few months after the big fire that had just happened. It continues to be this apocalyptic aspect to LA beyond what's shown in films themselves. I'm wondering, for some of our audience who might not be familiar with, say, the work of Catherine Opie or Guadalupe Rosales, if you could share a little bit about their work and what drew you to it in the context of your work.
Yeah, so the Guadalupe Rosales project, I discovered quite late in the writing of the project. And it's the Rosales work is extraordinary. There are two Instagram projects. One's called Map Points. Another is Fatranas e Rucas. And it's basically, she's developed this archive, Latinx, like a culture, youth culture from the 1990s to the present. So the map points actually is part of that. It's documenting the party culture in LA from the 1990s to the present. And then it's accumulating this wealth of photographs, films, visual culture, party posters. At Map Points is a project which signifies, like, in the 1990s, when you would have an underground party, you'd create a point in the map. So you wouldn't have an actual, like, an address that you would go to, and if that's posted in a flyer. Often you'd have to, go to a gas station, get the directions from a gas attendant, or receive a number to call, and you'd call this number on a pager, or there'd be a pre-recorded voice note, which would tell you the location of a party. And so it's this, documenting this underground culture. It's important to think about this project. At one point is developing an archive of Latina visual culture or Latinx culture in East LA, and thinking about how this community is being remembered through photographs. One way to think about it is through this archival lens, but it's also creating living statements with photographs. So it's creating sequences, collages, atlases of images. Often when this work is being displayed in, say, exhibitions, she's constructed these expansive atlases of images, which also is narrated through, like, living captions describing her experience with a particular party crew, or a friend that had passed away. And I think that's often missed in kind of discussions of projects like these, is how photographs construct kind of a type of living memory or living statements that persist in the present. And I think that's the one valuable thing about Guadalupe's work.
Now, in terms of the kind of long arc of writing the book, what did you find the most difficult in taking on such an immense project, and the sheer length of time, and also that it took to complete it?
I think, just finishing it, really. Yeah. Also, what to include and what not to, like, what is actually after. It's a whole year has passed since publishing the book. So, in the meantime, I've found that there's all these other projects that I could have discussed, wrote about. There could have been another chapter. And I feel like I've left out, or it might have been grasped or thought of this project as a general survey of a city. And then I'm kind of haunted by the fact that there are all these other projects that and that's the difficult aspect of the project. Okay, but the one thing I would just say is that to treat art history as an unfinished conversation, and so you put this out in the world, and hopefully someone else can oppose this project and create a different history than what I've written.
So you were talking about anachronism.
Yeah. So I think it's the third chapter in the book. It's a strange title. You speak of things that haven't happened yet in the past tense. And this is, you might recognize it from the first Terminator film. This is a line that Sarah Connor utters to Kyle Reese when Kyle Reese has gone back from the future to the past to save Sarah Connor, who's the savior of the human race, right? Because the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, has been sent back into the past to kill Sarah Connor, because Sarah Connor will give birth to John Connor, who will, lead the uprising against the machines. And there's this great line where she says, "You speak of things that I haven't done yet in the past tense." And I was like, oh, this is an amazing... it's a paradigm or a model for anachronism, and I mentioned that there are these photographs by John Davola of the MGM backlot, right? And he takes these photographs in the 1980s. the back lot is constructed to look like New York City in the near future. And this back lot is actively being demolished by the studio set because it's, no longer deemed profitable. So they need to demolish this set. But the set is, like I said, constructed to look like New York in the near future, but it's a near future that also looks like New York at the present day. And the present day of New York in the 1970s is New York of a fiscal crisis. And so there's all these like different times and time signatures that are found in this work by de Volle, which he's approaching the back. He's just photographing the backlot. It looks like New York, but it's not New York. It's a California New York. It's also haunted. There's no one there. So it's this empty set. So it's a ruin, but it's a farcical ruin. Right? And so I think this is also, one thing to think about when like looking at a lot of this work is that some of these projects play with our understanding of time and temporality and different time signatures. To add to that, there's an extended chapter on this project called Evidence. It's a collaboration by Mike Mandel and Larry Sultan, published in 1977. It's a photo book. The photo book is just titled Evidence. And there's no extended essay in the book. They're just black and white photographs. And these photographs were culled from the main research institutions, aerospace corporations up and down the California coast. And so places like Lockheed Martin, NASA, Stanford, Stanford had like different research facilities, and they all had these photographic archives. Mike Mandel and Larry Sultan both, called through all these photographs, and these photographs, depict very curious and strange scenarios. We could like look at some of the photographs and they're somewhat inexplicable. Like here's one image of three men wrapping another man in plastic. There's this, that's the cover of the photo book Evidence, which is just, it looks like a legal document, it has this blue cover, gold writing. And, these were photographs of, here's another image of kind of a destroyed interior. This man looks like he's wearing white pajamas. He has these wires connected to him, right? And they're, photographs of like different experiments from all these different like research institutions, but they're, often taken from the 1950s, the 1960s to, we think of some of these institutions, they're building the future of America. So these are images for the future, for future experiments. But obviously they're of the past. And so I think, photography has this anomalous relationship to time, right? Because it's an image of, the present, but it's also the past sent towards the future to a recipient in the future, right? And it's like, when someone holds a photograph, it has that complex weaving of the past, present, and the future, right? And I think some of these projects confront that anomalous relationship to time. And that's why, part of the project starts with Zizix, right? And then moves back in time, because it kind of, I think photography in itself is not this chronological medium. It messes with time.
Now, since I know you live across the street and you are very recently a parent with your partner, I wonder if you can also share what else you're up to. Do you have new writing projects, or what's your next project going to be besides having a child?
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm a PERICULum Fellow. There's a foundation in Quebec that sponsors for a year the research in contemporary art. So I'm writing another book about contemporary art in Vancouver and the crossover, and focusing mostly on the last 10 years in Vancouver, looking at mostly exhibitions, smaller projects, and thinking about the crossover between experimental music and visual arts, looking at some of the exhibitions at Pale Fire, but also work that's displayed at the Belkin Vancouver Art Gallery. And the one thing I would say is that, that you have part of the impetus of the project is, if you remember that Vancouver special show from 2017, the Vancouver Art Gallery had this kind of mandate to produce these biannual shows. And then it moved to like every 5 years. And at this point, I'm not too sure that a project like that will happen again at the Vancouver Art Gallery. And so I'm trying to, revive that spirit of kind of investigation and trying to theorize the present moment and to think through what people are producing. Yeah. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on Below the Radar B-Sides. The name, once again, of the book is Lost Days, Endless Nights, Photography and Film from Los Angeles, and we'll link to the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrew.
Well, thank you for having me.
Below the Radar is a knowledge democracy podcast originally created by SFU's Vancity Office of Community Engagement. The Below the Radar B-Sides are supported by Vancity Credit Union. Thanks for tuning in to this episode with Andrew Witt. Find out more about his work in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in.